I have a feeling this was considered pretty radical. It was either wrong or radical.
Okay.
He set this in his living room?
Okay. Okay.
I mean, John, you used the word pastiche before. There's an awful lot of earlier than 19th century typography going on here. I mean, maybe the thing to say is that in a lot of ways it feels more ephemera-based than book-based. Maybe what's, I hadn't thought about that before, but you know, in a way the title pages don't look like title pages. They look like much earlier ephemera, even though the use is more modern and the context is more modern.
The idea of taking a convention and retrofitting it with content that's specific for the book, in this case in wine, if it was in fact a Bible, there's something kind of comically sacrilegious about that. And so there's just something wonderful about, and we can call it historicist, I guess, if it picks up on an earlier form, but if it's retrofitting the actual content with something different, like, you know, decanting the Madeira, then it's suddenly, I mean, that's what I mean. To me, it's a sense of humor. There's such a sense of humor in this work that even though at first blush it's very sort of straight and kind of, you know, diligent in its way, there's something, all those periods on the cover, I think it's great.
And I think it's one of the traps of the university press world. We once went back through the AIJ book show and classified books by which books were serious books versus popular culture. And you can see this basically steady line downward. And increasingly university press books just don't make the book show because it's harder and harder to do distinguished books. The world's not so interested in them. The design has actually gotten less distinguished from most university presses. This Walden is extremely beautiful, very unusual for its size for a heritage press. It's much more, you know, a handbook in your Thoreau for your hand.
A portable Thoreau.
The illustrations are unbelievable, but it's not the famous edition of Walden. You know, the famous edition is the Updike edition, mostly because the reason it's a rare book and valuable is because it has illustrations, photographs by Steichen. And I think that a lot of what we remember of designers has to do with these things on the side. It's not, I mean, clearly Updike earned his own reputation, but there's an awful lot of books along the way that are because of who the book is by, who the photographer is, that support, you know, the typographic reputation. I mean, the person who comes to mind who's working today, who obviously is aware of all the designers we're talking about in the 20th century, but is Jerry Kelly. Because especially, and I think the one place where I see some similarity with Rollins is in really technical bibliographic making, in trifles, where he actually really is playing around with some pretty radical ways of showing technical bibliographic information. I mean, it doesn't look like, you know, the normal way you're supposed to do it. You can sort of see some of the, you know, really beautiful things that Jerry Kelly has done.
I'm very interested in the fact that he wrote some of these things. And so by taking responsibility as the author, you start to see a personality behind the font choices. And you know, just the idea that here in the book on the trifles which make perfection, which I keep coming back to, it's very ornamental and it has all these crazy ligatures, but there's just a spirited energy to it. And you can't help but think that because he wrote it and didn't just design it, there's this sort of, you know, coming together of all of these things that he loves, his love of the minutiae of typography, along with his ability to actually create form for that typography. And so I'm particularly drawn to that because I see that there's more than just the person making the type specs.
Okay.
I mean, when you say set in the living room, after the day of the full-time job, you know, producing 2,000 books for Yale University
you're like
Press.
that.
This, you know how many hours of typesetting this is?
You would love that. You'd be so happy if you could sit in our living room and set type all night.
And drink wine.
And drink wine. And he drank wine while he was doing this, and everything lines up. There's no, maybe, are there any glaring errors in this because of the beverages of choice during the making of this